Alright, welcome back to DogFoodCon. We are joined by Cassandra Faris, who is one of the organizers and speakers. What was your talk about?
My talk was about mental health in tech. I'm a retired organizer.
Oh, yeah.
I organized this conference for like 6 or 7 years and decided to step back and focus on some more diversity and inclusion focused initiatives for another community group. So,
I see.
How's that going? It's going good. It's for a different conference. It's called Stir Trek, and we're doing a scholarship program called the Stir Scholarship. It's for high school girls who want to pursue programming degrees.
Oh, nice.
So we'll be making a big announcement about that next week. But
cool.
I've been made the president of that group, so it's a new community project.
Yeah.
So,
Stir Trek I like. I know you guys do like, I don't know, you have like the Avengers and stuff.
Yeah. It's a conference in the movie theater, and there's always like whatever the most recent Marvel movie is gets shown after the conference, and you get some fun thematic things.
That sounds fun. So your mental health talk, what's the gist of that?
The kind of crux, it's called Health, the Most Important Tech Tool, and the main crux is that you, as technologists, our health is the most important tool that we have. And I say that because if we're not physically and mentally healthy, we aren't able to function well, we aren't able to support family, teams, any of that stuff. And in our industry, there's a lot of talk right now about burnout, there's a lot of talk about kind of some of the pressure we put ourselves under. And one of the things I want to do is make it okay to prioritize our health a little bit more, and also to, those of us who have mental illnesses, when we're comfortable, if we're comfortable, make it okay to talk about that stuff and help remove some of the stigma. The prevalence of mental illness in the U.S. is 20%. According to a survey done by a group called Open Sourcing Mental Illness, within the tech industry, it's 35% of people.
What do you think that is?
I'm not sure. Anecdotally, that number seems to be right based on what I've learned, but I don't know if it's that people who struggle with mental illness maybe opt into technology because it can be, though less so now, a more isolated sort of job.
Yeah.
Maybe because in some ways some of the mental illness stuff can in some ways like help you.
What do you mean?
So like, I was going back to, so I have ADHD is one of the things I have, and the ADHD in some ways helps in my role, in my kind of people-facing, talking, lots of context switching sorts of roles. Yeah. And it has this other piece where you can hyper-focus. I was actually chatting with somebody about this last night, where you get this like hyper-focus aspect, and when you get into that zone, you can really concentrate and get your code or your project done. Yeah. But I'm not sure why so many people who
like I'm thinking, like, I guess it depends what is in the umbrella of like mental illness they've talked about. Like they used to talk about like Asperger's syndrome as being a mental illness, but now it's not really thought of that way anymore because like it's people who think differently, right? And you see a lot of that in tech for sure. Like, lots of my coworkers identify as having Asperger's syndrome. And like if you consider that, like I would definitely go, definitely higher. But if you're talking about like more, not different ways of thinking, but just like really ADHD, anxiety, depression, like you start to wonder, like, is this causal or...
Yeah, anxiety and depression are, two of the ones that a lot of people talk about and will struggle with, and I don't know if it's I don't know why.
I deal with anxiety and depression quite a bit.
Me too. They're lots of fun.
Yeah.
They just feed each other. It's great.
So, like, I can relate to the thing you just said about going through periods where, like, I write a lot of code, right? And, like, I'll think about my projects for a very long time. And, like, I'll sit down to try to work on them. And I'll spend, like, 5 seconds writing code, and I'm back on Reddit, or I'm back on Twitter. And then I'll go through periods where I'm doing nothing but that, and I can focus completely on it, and I get like all the stuff I've been thinking about for months done in a period of like 4 days, and then I'm back to crying on the couch.
And that's like the piece of it. So the kind of a little bit of the story that I tell was about myself. I realized at some point there was a point where I needed help. Like I could no longer like yoga myself or like hang out with my friends out of a funk. Like I used to be able to, I would get in a funk and the sun would come out and I'd feel better and do yoga or something like that and I'd start to feel better, and at some point that stuff all stopped working. And I grew up in a family where everybody's open about this stuff, so I kind of was like, well, I think I might have a problem. I need to go get help now before things get worse. And then in retrospect, I look back to what a much darker place I was in a few years ago versus now. I just feel a lot better. And then as I've started to talk about this topic more and more, it brings up these great conversations for the following weeks and months and encourages people. There was somebody who, yesterday after my talk, somebody tweeted at me that after I did the talk, it made them think maybe I need to reconsider some of my priorities and what I'm doing with my life so I don't kind of make my depression worse by putting so much pressure on myself.
Well, like I found mine is exasperated by the people I'm around sometimes. Like I remember I got divorced, and I was very emotional and upset about it.
Yeah.
And I talked to one of my male friends about it, and the second I started being emotional around him, he like yelled at me, and he made me feel bad, and it was like, okay, I can't even be around you ever again after this.
Yeah.
And like, I stopped talking to him, and it honestly helped, because like, anybody who makes you feel bad about this stuff is not going to help.
Exactly. And that's something that I was married at one point, and my former spouse had a very hard time supporting the depression and the recovery of it because he's an engineer and very logical mindset. And so he would understand things like, I have a migraine, I take some medicine and I feel better, but that's not how depression works. That's not how you treat it. And so at the time, I was so upset to no longer have him in my life, and now in retrospect, I realized that I deserve somebody who is going to be able to support me through this, and I'm doing better without kind of some of those more toxic influences.
Yeah.
And it's hard. That's one thing I bring up a lot in this talk is, as technologists, we want to solve a problem. And these problems aren't black and white, so it's not like somebody who's in the midst of a panic attack, you tell them, calm down.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Oh yeah, calm down. Usually
Exactly.
really effective.
Exactly. I always say that's like telling somebody in a wheelchair to get up and walk. Like, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And so you can't do that. And so that's the thing that I encourage a lot of people to do is at least have a few people in your support system who, when you're having one of those days where you're struggling, before they try to give you advice or not, ask that question, are you looking for advice or do you just want somebody to listen?
Yeah.
And I have several friends I have that kind of agreement with, and so that helps because sometimes you are looking for advice, but sometimes you just want some empathy and somebody to listen to you.
Yeah, listening is the most important part of the equation.
Exactly.
And listening involves not talking.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. Not talking and just waiting and hearing people out and then relating if you can, all that good stuff.
Yeah, like not everything needs feedback.
Exactly.
And people don't understand that in conversation sometimes, especially with sensitive things like this. It's just like, I just want somebody to hear me.
Yeah.
Because like a lot of times, like you don't even know your own thoughts until they come out of your mouth, which is like, I've gone through periods where I've talked to therapists and stuff about things. And at the time, I was like, why am I doing this? I know what I'm thinking, right? But then I don't, And after like a few minutes of actually getting the words out, it's like, oh man, like the things I just said were not the things I thought I was thinking. And because just the exercise of putting words to the thing, it forces you to just like, I don't know, just like, what is this thing I'm feeling, right?
Exactly.
Because it's all usually very muddy, and it's hard to separate things sometimes.
Yeah, and it takes time. That's another thing that I reiterate in this talk is that whether you take a medicine route, a therapy route, or a both route, and everybody's situation is different, and it can change over time, but it's like 6 to 8 weeks of therapy and or medication before you start seeing some progress. You have to stick with it.
Yeah.
And that's a really hard thing to do, is you have to be willing to put in the work and think and examine yourself. And so
When you're depressed, it's so hard.
it is so hard.
It's
I
like
know.
you just want to do nothing. I mean, like the people that are like, just do things, right?
Yeah.
Are like, they're technically right?
Yeah.
They're giving you the advice that's
Yeah.
like, okay, this is true. Like I do have to go exercise and interact with people. That is the solution to this stuff. But it's like, that's telling me to do that is not how that happens.
Yeah. And then there's also like the balance. So get out and do try to make yourself do stuff. But every once in a while, it's okay to just be gentle with yourself and just like have a day to just rest and relax and not put so much pressure on yourself. And sometimes I feel like you need that too.
Yeah.
Just when it becomes an everyday thing, that you're not leaving the house and you're not getting out of bed and you're not interacting, that's when it becomes a problem, I think. But Just like you get physically sick, like there might be a day that you get a cold and you can power through, but then the next day you need to just rest, and sometimes we need to rest.
Yeah. So in the context of being someone in technology as a worker, but also as like a leader, like what kinds of things should we be doing to support people in their, not just struggles with mental illness, but even if you don't have a mental illness, like obviously taking care of your mental health is very important, and maintaining it. What can we do right now to improve what we do with that?
I think a lot of it is, this is an industry that to some extent glorifies a lot of unhealthy habits. There's a lot of drinking and partying that goes on, which that's fun every once in a while, and do it all the time. And there's a lot of, like, you read these interviews with these startup founders who are really successful, who they only sleep 3 hours a night, and people are expected to work 80 hours a week, and all this kind of pressure we're under. And so I think a lot of it is that people, management, leaders need to acknowledge that programmers are people, which that sounds silly, but I think sometimes people think of technologists as like code robots.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that one of the things, I've talked to some of my friends about this, especially my women friends, and I don't know if that's significant, but that there's more, I think, of an expectation in tech that you're in tech because tech is your life. Like, if you go to, like, if you're an HR person, nobody thinks, oh, that person just thinks about HR all day, every day, and this is all they want to do, and they're dedicated to their job. Like, I mean, maybe they are dedicated to their job. Like, I don't know. But, like, there's so much expectation that code is your life, and when you're done with work, you go home and you work on your own tech project. You know what? When I get done with work, I don't want to look at a computer. I don't want to write code, whatever. But I think that's part of that toxic culture that you talked about, is that, like, everybody thinks that, this is what you want to do all the time, so why not work?
Yeah.
But if you do that, like...
Yeah. And it's hard, too, because it's a lot of very passionate people. And I think about, like, I'm a speaker, and I think about the fact that when speaking wasn't a big piece of my day job, I would go do my day job all day as a recruiter and in marketing, and then I would go home and, like, write my talks and organize conferences and do all this stuff. And it's... A lot of us are passionate and excited about that, but when that passion takes over your life and it's your only focus, that's the problem. And some people, it's also like at different phases in life. Like, I know people who, earlier in life, before they have a lot of other outside commitments, they might want to be able to do that, 60-hour-a-week, 80-hour-a-week startup life, but then at some point, people have families and priorities shift and they re-examine, and so at that point, you might not have time for those side projects, and that's fine too. I think it's just a matter of, I think just the more people talk about this stuff, there's a lot of problems in tech that we aren't solving overnight, and this is one of them.
Yeah.
I think it's just a lot of getting people talking and bringing awareness to this, and then to some extent, especially as you are a more experienced person in this industry, you have a fair bit of privilege when it comes to job options, because everybody's in demand. We've all got the recruiter spam. And so I think that especially as you get more experience and have more authority within your role, push back a little bit, and explain that you can't work all this time, and kind of draw lines. And like I said, the more confident and experienced you get, the easier that gets. But that's a piece of it too, is just saying, no, like, I'm not going to go home and work another 30 hours this week.
And like not having to, and something I emphasize when friends often complain about these things, I'm like, you know what, you can say no. Like, you don't have to give a reason. Like, sometimes you do. But like a lot of times, the more that you're like, well, I don't want to because blah, blah, blah. It's almost like just giving somebody an authority over you something to argue with. It's like, you know what? I worked my 40 hours, and I'm not going to work at 8 o'clock at night, and I don't have to tell you why. If we didn't agree already that this was going to be part of the thing, like, I didn't agree to it, so I don't have to do it. Like, I mean, you don't want to be totally ornery about everything. Like, you want to be a team player and help out when you can.
Yeah.
You can't always. And,
Exactly.
It's not up for argument all the time.
Yeah.
Right? And if you feel like it is,
Also, it's also tech, like, it's not effective to spend that much time doing
Exactly.
it.
No.
Like, I work for a boot camp, right? And people that join, they hear boot camp and they think, oh, I should be doing this all hours of the day and night, right? Yeah, I should be doing push-ups like I'm in a literal boot camp all the time. And, like, some people can live and work that way, and it's okay. But what we've seen is, like, people need to go home and unwind and separate themselves from it and rest and eat well and, do normal, healthy human things.
Yes.
Because this is a thing. It's not like you're working in a factory where you're taking widgets off a conveyor belt and putting them over here. Like, more hours in does not necessarily mean more output. Because it's it's a creative kind of thing. And you need to be calm and relaxed and able to process thoughts in order to connect logic and things like that.
This is what you were talking about before. You were like, well, I just think about what I'm going to do for a long time, and then in 4 days, I just get it all done. All this stuff that I was thinking about forever. And like, you're extremely productive. Like, you've written so much stuff. Like, oh my god. Like, but it's not because you put in so much every day. It's like, when you're in it, you're really in it.
Yeah.
And it produces so much. But like, if you were forced to do it when you weren't into it, like, you wouldn't do anything.
Well, early in my career, I had managers and stuff that would try to make me work that way. Like, they would literally get mad at me if I got up from my desk for things, because they're so used to, it was, a company that's been around forever, and like they have their own processes of how they judge people and stuff. And like, that was one of the things. It's like, are they sitting and doing stuff? Because that's how they measured productivity, was time in the seat. And it's like, I need to walk. I can't even think if I'm sitting all the time. Like, I literally have a circle around my house that I pace as I write code, because otherwise it's impossible for me to even think, because like, I get caught up with anxiety and weird thoughts that are just like, distractions from things. And I don't know, I feel like so many people in tech, like, they think that it's like a factory, that it's like making widgets and stuff, and that the more time you spend, you're necessarily going to get more out of it, but it's not true.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, so I very much prioritize some of my hobbies and my social time with my friends, because it's something that really recharges me as an extrovert. And it's interesting to me that I can be at one of my soccer tailgates, or last night I was sitting at dinner talking with some friends and laughing and stuff. We were all speakers, but we weren't talking about tech at all. We were talking about a lot of other things. And a problem I've been trying to solve around kind of measuring the impacts of marketing and events like this on business success. We were talking not necessarily about that, but during that conversation I was like, I think I've kind of started to figure out how this is a more effective and succinct way to explain how I'm like solving this problem.
Yeah.
And how I'm measuring this, and it's odd because it happens all the time. Like, I'll be in these social settings and I'll be like, that thing that I was thinking about or trying to figure out, it clicked.
Yeah.
Because your brain is outside of that, like, in front of your computer, have to focus mindset. It's a more creative environment. It's really interesting to me how many things then I'll come back to my desk or come back to my work and I'll have figured this thing out when I was, cheering for a soccer team or something, whatever I'm doing for fun. So
you gotta, like, if you're, I don't know, if you were like in a video game trying to build something, you didn't have enough resources. You can't just like focus your way through it. You have to go outside of where you are and get more resources to do the problem.
Yeah, I have a friend who's a writer, and she would say, like, she, sit down and try to write stuff all the time, but then she's like, the more I do that, the less stories I have to tell, because I'm not out living life.
Exactly. Yep.
And it's the same kind of thing. It's like, we're people are building complex systems that are usually based around human interaction, and if you don't have human interaction, you have no way to empathize with your customers and the people that are using your stuff.
That's exactly how it goes with writing talks. If I didn't talk to people and I wasn't out and about and I didn't have hobbies and experiences and stuff, I wouldn't be able to talk about the stuff I talk about, because I always say my thing is the human side of tech, is what I speak on and what my topics focus on. But you don't get all those stories sitting behind a computer. You don't get those stories looking at resumes and lines of code and whatever your job is. You get those stories by having conversations and experiencing life and living, and then you can bring it back into a professional setting and learn some lessons. And so there will be times where I have almost like a writer's block when I'm trying to put a talk together, and then it starts to click, kind of probably like when you're coding, and I'll sit there and like for 2 hours I'll just outline and sketch out how I want the narrative of a talk to look, and that's a very cool moment.
Yeah.
But a lot of times that happens outside of like sitting in front of pen and paper or computer.
Yeah. Yeah, like for instance in hip hop music, right? there is a thing where the first record that somebody makes is almost always their best one.
Yeah.
And it's because they've been writing it their entire lives. And then the second one, it's like, okay, well, now I have a hit record. So now I need to continue this.
Yeah.
So I'm going to sit down and force myself to write. But it's like, I don't have any stories. I already told all the good ones.
Yeah.
So now I either have to make them up, which they do sometimes, or I have to go live life and make new things happen. And until that, new stuff happens to me, like, I'm not going to be able to write stuff.
Check back in 10 years.
Yeah.
I'm going to have sweet reps.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Do you have anything you want to plug?
No, not really.
Twitter?
Twitter, I'm at Cassandra Faris. I'm at Cassandra Faris everywhere on the internet. And stay tuned for information on the Star Trek Scholarship Program.
Okay.
I'm excited about that, and we'll be doing kind of a big announcement about it and start publicizing it a little bit more. But
Well, when you do that, send me a link, and I'll make sure to put it in the episode.
yeah, it's StirScholarship.com is the website that you can go to, and I think there's like a donate button and stuff. And we're early stages, but the 501c3 is set up, we're ready to go, and so we'll award the first scholarships this spring.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.